Recognize the gentlelady from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's talk about invasion. Let's talk about the invasion of the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, when the heart of American democracy was attacked by a mob, many of them violent, of then President Trump's supporters who fought to keep him in power illegally. The evidence is overwhelming. And yet many, many Republican members of the House not only continue to deny the truth, but still will not admit that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. This includes our current House Speaker, who even as recently as several weeks ago refused to affirm that Joe Biden won the 2020 election and is the legitimate president of our nation. The Speaker of the House. And it includes another member of GOP House leadership who has taken to calling those imprisoned for their illegal actions on January 6th hostages. Hostages. They attacked our very democracy, and yet they are the victims? It's morally bankrupt. This is not only a sick, twisted perversion of the truth, it's also deeply offensive to Americans across this country. What my extreme MAGA Republican colleagues and their apologists are doing is perpetrating a deeply cynical, psychological manipulation. They tell us we can't trust our own eyes, that the men and women in uniform here at the Capitol were not battered and bloodied by the mob. They tell us that it's not true that members and their staff were hiding in fear for their safety, that it's not true that Democrats and Republicans on that day knew that they were in danger, and that the president, who incited the riot and the invasion and the insurrection, they knew this truth. And they said on that day, we're done with this guy. We know the role that he played. We're done with this guy. They knew his role, they saw it up close, and then they backpedaled and apologized for Trump and spread misinformation. So I find this offensive as a public official who has sworn to uphold the Constitution, but it's also deeply concerning as an American who cares deeply about this country and the Constitution. So you have to forgive me. You gotta give me a little grace here for not being able to take this hearing seriously. This hearing, as we've said, is an absurd legal argument. The Constitution is clear. The federal government is supreme in matters of immigration and border policy. And with all due respect to Chairman Roy, I believe that his call for Texas to ignore the Supreme Court is an endorsement of lawlessness and chaos. I am a thoughtful and committed public servant. Yes, we need a secure border. Yes, we need humane border policy. We need immigration reform. We need more legal pathways for migrants to work. Yes, we are a deeply divided Congress, and we must work in a bipartisan manner to actually solve the immigration issues that have plagued us for decades. And yet, that's not what this hearing is about. And it's worse than a distraction. It's worse than a waste of time. It's actually an insult to Americans everywhere. Right now, senators, Republicans, and Democrats are working on a compromise immigration bill. Right now, the president has said that he is prepared to sign a bipartisan immigration bill. Right now, the president has said he will put an additional $14 billion into securing the border. What has been the response from my Republican colleagues in the House? No. The response is no. Trump doesn't want it, so we don't want it. We don't want a solution. We don't want to alleviate suffering. We don't want to actually secure the border. So you have to give me some grace. You got to forgive me for not believing the calls for this being such an emergency. A bipartisan group in the Senate says, we have a solution. The MAGA response has been, let's keep the chaos, we're good. Let's keep the suffering, we're good. This supposed extreme danger doesn't seem so extreme as I sit in this hearing because it's not good for the ex-president. So again, forgive me for not taking this hearing seriously. Our Republican colleagues have made it clear repeatedly that they will not work in a bipartisan manner on actual immigration reform. I yield back.
At the desk. Ms. Balint, sorry.
That's all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have an amendment at the desk.
The gentlelady has an amendment, and I'd ask the clerk to, what do I ask the clerk to do? Let me find my notes here, sorry. The clerk will designate the amendment. The staff will distribute copies of the amendment. In just about 30 seconds, I'll come back to you for opening remarks.
Amendment number 9, being considered fifth on climate change, offered by Ms. Balint.
Ms. Balint, I now yield 4 minutes for your opening remarks. Give you the 1 minute of the last word.
Thank you. We in Congress have a critical role to play in combating climate change and in investing in clean energy. And climate change is real, and it's caused by human actions. And it's imperative that we act strongly to address the crisis. We're seeing storms and extreme weather we haven't seen before in this country because of climate change. And last summer, Vermonters weathered extreme flooding that left many communities devastated, and we're still actually rebuilding from that catastrophe. And this winter, Vermont has seen record low snowfall amounts, and maple sugar makers are starting the tapping season the earliest ever. So we see in Vermont, up close, how climate change threatens the crop yields, the infrastructure, water and energy supplies, human health, and creates looming disaster assistance needs. It also threatens our economy. There's no question. In 2021 and 2022, the United States had 35 separate billion-dollar extreme weather and climate-related disaster events costing more than $180 billion in direct economic losses. Congressional Democrats and President Biden have tackled this issue head-on. Last Congress, the Inflation Reduction Act made the greatest federal investment in history to fight climate change. It invested nearly $400 billion in climate solutions and clean technologies to deliver the single greatest investment in combating the climate crisis in American history. It also lowers costs for American families, creating jobs here at home, advancing climate justice, and positioning the United States as the global leader in clean energy. What we're dealing with today are Republican policies that consistently put polluters over people and jeopardize our family and our planet's futures. Republicans' H.R. 1, their number one priority this Congress, is a massive giveaway to corporate polluters. It guts our bedrock environmental laws and jeopardizes clean air and safe drinking water. I'm here today calling on my colleagues not to roll back the investments that we've made to improve our future. I yield back.
1 minute, and I'll give you some change there too to make your closing comments.
Appreciate that. Mr. Chair, I agree with my colleague that we do need fiscal sanity. Absolutely. And it's utter insanity not to deal with the climate emergency. You also spoke, my colleague also spoke about small businesses. Our capital city in Vermont, Montpelier, lost nearly every single small business in our downtown because of catastrophic flooding as a result of climate change. Every single business. We're still coming back for it. We don't have a functioning post office in our downtown. For Vermonters and rural communities across the country, climate change is here and it's having a catastrophic effect. It's not just a threat to our small businesses, but also our agricultural industry, our natural resources, our very livelihoods. It's a threat to our survival, our community's survival. We need budgets that create and sustain good-paying green jobs, enable our farmers to withstand climate change, protect people living in our low-lying areas from flooding, and transition us to a clean energy economy. This is not just about the here and now, it's about the future, and I urge my colleagues to support my amendment to the budget resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the gentlelady from Vermont. The question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by Ms. Balint. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chair, I ask for a recorded vote.
Ms. Balint asked for a recorded vote pursuant to our unanimous consent, our being me and the ranking member. We'll postpone the roll call vote until later in the markup. Are there any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman, before we,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say I very much appreciate the remarks of the ranking member, and I always appreciate, Mr. Chair, your push to try to keep this committee centered in thinking about the people we represent back home and trying to create an environment in the committee where we are trying to have a conversation with each other and not just hurling insults at each other. So I have prepared remarks, but I'm not actually going to use them because I just have to say it's so tedious when I come to this committee and, I came up through my legislature. I'm used to working in a bipartisan manner. It's so tedious whenever we try to talk about issues like Social Security and Medicare that we get accused of being socialists. I hear that all the time in this committee by certain members on the other side. And I just have to highlight that across this country, I don't care what district you represent, the elderly in this country depend on Social Security and Medicare, and I don't think they think of themselves as socialists. They want a fighting chance to age with dignity, to not live out their lives in poverty. And so to come here and always have that hurled at us is not just insulting to us who are trying to work in a bipartisan manner, but it's insulting to Americans across this country who rely on those programs to live out a life of dignity. And we can have a conversation about bipartisanship and working together with dignity. And in fact, I will say the brightest part of my week this week was meeting in the Bipartisan Rural Health Caucus yesterday morning. Started my day that way. And we came together, Democrats and Republicans, and talked about issues that cut across party line, talking about the mental health crisis, the housing crisis, substance use disorder that is racking all of our congressional districts. And it was truly a conversation of how do we prioritize what the needs of our constituents are and how do we move forward. And so you can call me a socialist, you can call my constituents socialists because they want to have their Medicare and Medicaid protected. But what you're doing is showing that you're more interested in hurling names than actually getting down to the business of doing this work. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from Vermont for her comments, and it's at least share the sentiments that we ought to spend more time working together to solve problems and debating the facts on both sides of the issue. With that, I would like to...
Is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Special Counsel Herr, for being here today. I know it's been hours and hours, and I really appreciate you staying to the bitter end here. And I think it speaks to the possibility and promise afforded by this nation that you, as a child of immigrants, sit here as special counsel, and I, as a child of an immigrant, sit here as a member of Congress. There is a lot that's been said today, and part of the challenge that I have is trying to translate this for my constituents back home. And so I want to start with sort of the top line. So you were tasked with identifying whether criminal conduct occurred regarding classified documents. And after over a year of investigation, including 150 witness interviews and over 7 million documents reviewed, you wrote in the first sentences of the executive summary, quote, "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. We would reach the same conclusion even if Department of Justice policy did not foreclose criminal charges against a sitting president." Were those your words?
yes.
Thank you. So let's get into it. Mr. Hur, at any time did DOJ leadership or the Attorney General attempt to influence the outcome of your investigation?
No.
Do you believe it's important that the special counsel investigations or any DOJ investigation be impartial and free of influence from political actors?
Yes.
Do you believe you were independent and thorough in your report?
Yes.
Do you believe, do you think it's true that you received no pressure from Attorney General Garland in this matter?
That's correct.
Is it true that you had all of the resources that you needed enabled for you to conduct your interviews, to conduct your investigation, and to complete your report?
Yes.
Is it true that you recommended that the Attorney General decline to charge President Biden?
I submitted a report to the Attorney General explaining my decision that criminal charges were not warranted in this matter.
Right, so you said on page 1 of the report, quote, "We conclude that the evidence does not establish Mr. Biden's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." Is it true that your report ultimately concluded that the evidence did not support a finding beyond a reasonable doubt that President Biden willfully retained classified materials?
Yes.
Is it true that President Biden cooperated with your investigation?
Yes.
Is it true that President Biden sat for an interview with you the day after the October 7th attacks in Israel in the midst of an international crisis?
He sat for interviews over 2 days, October 8th and October 9th.
Thank you. Is it true that that President Biden allowed the FBI to conduct thorough searches of his home and his beach house?
Yes.
Is it true that your report found multiple possible innocent explanations as to why the classified documents ended up where they did?
As part of our analysis, we walked through a number of different explanations that defense counsel could present at trial if this case were charged.
And as you said on page 6 of your report, quote, "In addition to this shortage of evidence, there are other innocent explanations for the documents that we cannot refute." Your report reads...
I see that language, yes.
Thank you. Your report reads, "With one exception, there is no record of the Department of Justice prosecuting a former president or vice president for mishandling classified documents from his own administration. The exception is former President Trump." Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
Is it true, or is it correct that your report recommends no charges and that you would be, that would be the case even if he were not a sitting president?
Correct.
So what we've had today is hour after hour after hour of trying to distract us from the clear statements that come through this report. And you yourself have said multiple times today, there was no attempt to obstruct justice by the president, by the Department of Justice, by the Attorney General, that you had all the resources that you needed to conduct a fair and thorough investigation and report, and that what you concluded was, in fact, the evidence was not sufficient to bring charges against the president for mishandling documents. I thank you for being here today. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Young, for being here. And, you know, we do truly appreciate both your professionalism and your expertise. You're not new to the Hill. And we appreciate the time that you've given us today. I have a question. We just heard this back and forth about the debt. It was kind of hard to tease out the parts because there was quite a bit of talking over your answers. My understanding is that President Trump added $8.4 trillion to the debt, and I'm wondering if I have that correct.
You do, and the point I was trying to make is debt is cumulative over administrations.
And do you know, was that the largest increase in the debt in modern history?
In modern history, yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that direct answer. One of the things that I talk about a lot in this committee is housing, and not just because it's greatly impacting Vermonters. We have the second highest rate per capita of homelessness in the nation, which is surprising to people because we are a rural state. But I also like to bring it up in this committee because it is something that cuts across party line. It doesn't matter what congressional district you're representing, you're probably experiencing a housing crisis. And it is a growing crisis in rural America. And so across the country, we have seen skyrocketing rates. We've seen predatory landlords, hedge funds buying up 500,000 homes. I know for me, I think about housing as the basis of stability for families. And so it enables children to thrive. It enables people to get better healthcare outcomes. And I know that we can end homelessness through more humane, cost-effective solutions that ensure that everyone has access not just to permanent housing, but also with supportive services. And I'm wondering if you could this morning tell us, how does the president's budget advance those goals of ending homelessness through more permanent supportive housing so people stay housed?
So when we talk about lowering costs, which I think I've heard agreement that we need solutions.
Yeah.
The president's put forward many proposals on housing, and I'd like to talk about a few. One, new first-time home buyer and home seller tax credit of $10,000 over 2 years. That would improve affordability for middle-class first-time home buyers. It also unlocks starter home inventory for first-time home buyers and helps middle-class families who are locked in because of rates.
Right.
Now, we know rates are going to come down over 2 years. This would be a 2-year bridge, so those middle-class families could move into larger homes if they need to for their families. It would also unlock starter homes. This budget also provides $10 billion in funding for a new first-generation down payment assistance program. We believe that is critical. We know most Americans hold wealth through home ownership. My family, being one of them, is a way into the middle class to own a home. And also to address the critical shortage of affordable housing communities. The budget provides $20 billion in funding for a new innovation fund for housing experience, which would be a competitive grant program for communities that want to expand housing supply. So this is critical. Part of lowering costs, what families will tell you they're hurting over is housing costs.
Yes.
We need more housing supply and more affordable housing. These proposals taken together would do that.
And I think people really discount the impact that a program like down payment assistance can really have on helping people build up equity. I know that was true when I was in my state legislature. I remember being in a committee meeting with some members of my committee saying, well, does this really make a difference to offer a down payment assistance program? It was so successful in Vermont, we reauthorized it numerous times because the take-up rate was incredible. It gives people an opportunity to get into homes and build up that equity. I'm wondering, too, if you could just touch a little bit on the housing supply issue. There's a critical need right now. How does the president's budget address the shortage in supply overall? Because it is locking up basically at every level of the housing market.
Yeah, the $20 billion I spoke about, which would be competitive, if communities wanted to apply for those grants and take on the zoning challenges and the many other local challenges that there are to affordable housing, this would allow communities to take their own local approach. Each has their own issues as to why they can't build enough housing, and that is why we would have a competitive program so people could send in proposals that work for them and work with our housing agencies to develop things that fit for your communities.
Well, I really appreciate it. I know I'm over time. I just want to say how important it is for me to know that the president and the administration understands how housing impacts the entire economy. And this is a way for us to have solid footing for individuals, for families, for communities. And I just really appreciate the attention to this issue. Thank you, Director Young. I appreciate it.
Ms. Balint, I lost control of the clock a long time ago, so we're just, but that's okay. We need to make our points. They're important. And my friend,
I'll recognize the gentlelady from Vermont, Ms. Balint.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that I've noticed in this committee and in my subcommittees is that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle often overpromise and underdeliver. And we are told repeatedly that there are conspiracy theories. We have a government that is going after individual and private citizens. I mean, this is the narrative over and over and over again. And, you know, as a new one to this committee, I'm always so disappointed when I feel like there's actually a lot that we agree on. And press freedoms and the Press Act is something that we were able to all come together on. And that's where our attention should be. We should always be making sure that we have a free and protected press. Now, what I'm hearing is really about employment disputes with news agencies that are now being conflated into some kind of conspiracy theory, once again, of the government going after, in this case, not just private individuals, but the press. And personal grievances, witnesses' personal grievances, are not actually attacks on the First Amendment and the free press. And from what I've heard from this hearing so far and the materials that we were given in preparation of this, it seems pretty clear to me that most of the allegations that have been made so far involve disputes over what are essentially employment and editorial decision-making by private news organizations in the context of news gathering, public reporting, which we all desperately need in this country. And as I said, we came together to support the Press Act. We all agree that it's an important piece of legislation to protect. I wish we spent more time in this committee really talking about important issues and not once again having the colleagues overpromise and underdeliver. If I believed every single time of the conspiracy theories that are pulled before this committee, I would have to believe that there was a boogeyman behind every corner, under every rock. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And it prevents us from doing the real work that we need to do to protect a free press, which we desperately need. Now, Ms. Fareed Johnson, could you explain to us what is jawboning? Can you explain that to us?
Yes, jawboning is the act of coercion by the government to an entity to get it to, well, in the case we've seen so far, to get it to change its positioning, programming, what have you, in terms of what it presents to the public.
Do you have concerns about congressional hearings such as this one, or statements that office holders make that could be intended to influence editorial decisions at news organizations?
News organizations are entitled to decide for themselves what subjects to cover, and the First Amendment protects the editorial decisions they make about their news coverage. It would be unconstitutional for any government official to attempt to coerce a news organization through legal threats or exercise of the state's coercive power.
And could jawboning be considered unconstitutional?
Well, as you know, we filed an amicus brief in the Murphy case that is before the Supreme Court. And what we talked about there is that we have said publicly, actually, that the government has an important role to play as a participant in public discourse, including trying to persuade, for example, social media platforms to change their policies, but not to engage in coercion to do so. There is a line there, and we believe that line is critically important.
And Ms. Fareed Johnson, what does it mean for free public discourse if public officials can informally intimidate or influence editorial decision-making, such as in a hearing such as this one?
The critical thing is that it cannot be coercion. We want to ensure that the First Amendment protections that are afforded to news organizations, for example, are maintained. And so that would mean that there cannot be that level of influence cannot go into coercion. But again, of course, we believe the government has an important role to play in terms of public discourse.
Thank you so much, Ms. Furry Johnson. I really appreciate your time. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady from Vermont. We're going to do one more. California, I now recognize the gentlelady from Vermont, Ms. Balint.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This issue is deeply personal for me. I am the granddaughter of Leopold Balint, who was horribly, viciously murdered in the Holocaust. When you go to Yad Vashem and you read the Book of Names, you'll see a lot of balance there. You don't see a lot of balance in this country. There's a lot of balance in that book. I've seen anti-Semitism firsthand. My family's experienced it. We are continuing to deal with the generational trauma that was brought upon my family through the Holocaust. I was raised in a house in which was taught at a very young age that you always need to look for the signs of anti-Semitism. It's used to manufacture division and fear, and anyone can fuel it, but it always benefits politicians who rely on that division and fear for their own power. It's incredibly frustrating to me that in Congress right now we can't have a conversation around anti-Semitism that will lead to actual action. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a video that I have compiled regarding anti-Semitism, and I ask unanimous consent to show it in committee.
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides. Any Jewish person that votes for Democrats hates their religion, they hate everything about Israel, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
Responsibility. Why do you use words like vermin and poisoning of the blood? The press, as you know, immediately reacts to that by saying, well, that's the kind of language that Hitler and Mussolini used.
Well, that's what they say. I didn't know that, but that's what they say. Because our country is being poisoned.
I think the FBI needs to be all over this. I think they need to look at the root causes and find out if some of this was funded by, I don't know, George Soros.
You know, we can look back in a time in history where people were told to wear a gold star, and they were definitely treated like second-class citizens, so much so that they were put in trains and taken to gas chambers in Nazi Germany. And this is exactly the type of abuse that Nancy Pelosi is talking about.
I stand by all of my statements. I said nothing wrong. And I think any rational Jewish person didn't like what happened in Nazi Germany, and any rational Jewish person doesn't like what's happening with overbearing mask mandates and overbearing vaccine policies.
Antifa's in the news because of a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville.
Well, isn't that interesting? That maybe that was created by the left.
Why do you say that?
Because let's look at the person that actually started the rally. It's come to our attention that this is a person from Occupy Wall Street that was an Obama sympathizer. So wait a minute, be careful on where you start taking these people to. And look at the background. George Soros is one of those people that actually helps, back these individuals. Who is he? I think he's from Hungary. I think he was Jewish, and I think he turned in his own people to the Nazis.
So you can see why I have a very hard time taking it seriously when we come together in this format, when I have to sit and listen to anti-Semitic rhetoric from my own colleagues. To the students, your experience is horrible, and you never should have had to go through that. I have family and friends who have students also at college campuses right now. Some are part of exercising their First Amendment rights against Israel. Some of them, like you, have been on the receiving end of horribly anti-Semitic rhetoric. Both these things are true. What I would like to see from my colleagues is to stop using anti-Semitism and your bogus attempts to address it to raise money and dollars. And why don't we do something that will actually solve the problem? Because it's real and many people in this country are suffering from it. I yield back.
Now recognize the gentlelady.
Lady from Vermont is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director, for being here. I know it's been a long day. Thank you for your time. So as I sit here, I'm really struck by what I feel we should be talking about here is that we have a fairly simple mandate from the American people, which is to do all we can to stop gun violence. As my colleagues have said, we have this horrible situation in this country, parents, teachers having to see children being killed every day by gun violence. The country is awash in illegal firearms. We've heard that. We have accidental shootings by and of children. We have increasing suicide rates. And of course, mass shootings continue across our nation. And public poll after public poll tells us the same thing. People want us in Congress to do something, to take action. More than half of Americans consistently support stricter gun laws. Listening to some of my colleagues, you'd think that we were on a different planet. The majority is not even approaching or discussing new public protections or stricter gun laws. And the ATF doesn't have the resources to inspect firearms dealers as directed by Congress. Right now, over 2,000 firearms dealers have not undergone any inspection in over 10 years. There are laws already on the books to help us stem the tide of this violence, but they aren't being enforced because oftentimes Republicans won't give them the money to do so. Now, Director, I appreciate very much that you're here today. I'd like to talk a little bit more specifically about the work that ATF does. You got a big job. How does your agency carry out its mission with just over 5,000 employees?
It's very difficult.
It's shockingly low, given
but the
your
way
charge.
Look, the way we do it is we have an incredible workforce. I mean, the career people, I'm the only political appointee at ATF. Not a single Schedule C person, just me. The people who are the career people get the credit here. These are agents, these are investigators, lab technicians, analysts, staff. They do incredible, dangerous work every day. And the only way to make any progress on this is partnership with our state and local partners, which we're better than anybody else with respect to others at. And number two, being smart about how we use the intelligence that we provide to identify the worst of the worst, to make sure that we are actually taking steps to do two things. Number one, identify the worst of the worst, the trigger pullers and the shooters, and get them out of the community, put them where they belong, incarcerated, bluntly, and also, at the same time, to do something to enforce the existing laws to cut off the supply of guns to those same people. It is far too easy for killers, felons, gang members, rapists, domestic violence people to get firearms, even though the law and everybody agrees they shouldn't have them. So you have to do both of those two things. It's a two-part strategy. And there are people who only want me to do one, and there are other people who only want me to do the other one. And the fact of the matter is, you're not going to make progress unless you have a reasonable approach on both.
So to follow up on that, how do you go about making those decisions about priorities? And are there functions that you unfortunately have to deprioritize due to the resource constraints that you have? And what are those?
So you make the decisions based on data, as best the data that you can find in real time. It's not always perfect. And there are areas of this country where I wish that we would have more agents. The New York City is an example. So in New York City Police Department is 36,000 strong. I have about 30 people in New York City. It is absolutely, and we punch way above our weight, and that's the case everywhere. So we are making decisions about where the crime threat is. When I make an investment on the southwest border, as we have, not I, we have, at ATF, that means at ATF that we can't start up a whole new division. That means we're pulling agents from some other place that we really care about. So we are constantly struggling to balance resources in the best way we can to face a lot of threats.
And Director, you know, I'm just about out of time, but I think it's clear that without substantial funding, we are not going to improve our statistics on gun violence, and we're not going to improve our public safety outcomes. We should be putting the money to work to help protect our kids. I say that as a member of Congress. I also say that as a former teacher and I'm a parent of 2 teenagers. We have to do something about this and not just talk about it. Thank you.
Gentlelady, we're up to. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Attorney General Garland, for being here today. I know it's been a very long day. And I just want to start by saying, you know, may the record show that although I'm a Vermonter, I do not partake in cannabis products, but after today's hearing, I could understand why someone might want to actually pop a gummy. It is maddening to witness so many of my colleagues seeming to care more about propping up and protecting a convicted felon than protecting the rule of law. And last week was a district week, so I was back in my home district. And I got asked the following questions a lot. And this was from people from across the political spectrum, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. They asked me the same questions. Why do they protect him? And the him in question is, of course, the former president. And they asked me, are they true believers? Are they apologists? Are they enablers? Are they just scared about what's going to happen to them if they don't defend the former president? I don't know. But I do know history is going to reveal the answer. The truth will out. The truth will out. Now, I'd like to leave the land of make-believe and talk about something that really matters to my people back home, which is the fact that we have a crushing housing crisis in Vermont right now. And the last time you sat before this committee, less than a year ago, I applauded your remarks on DOJ's increased enforcement against corporate crime, and in particular, DOJ's actions to take on corporate consolidation, price-fixing, collusion. And since coming to Congress, I've tried to focus a great deal on finding solutions to the nation's housing crisis, and in particular, what's happening in Vermont. In my home state, we saw a 12% jump in home prices over the last year. That's twice the national average and the highest yearly increase across all states. So part of the problem is lack of supply. But that's not entirely what's causing skyrocketing home prices. It's not just a lack of supply. There's corporate greed at work here too. So so-called property management software companies like RealPage and Yardi are making the housing crisis worse by facilitating unwarranted rent hikes by landlords. And I will say, you don't have to take my word for it. You can go right on the homepage of RealPage, which boasts that they increase rents for client landlords between 5% and 12% in every market in which they are coordinating prices. So in fact, one of the software developers told investigative journalists that leasing agents, quote, had too much empathy compared to computer-generated pricing. So this is how price-fixing cartels operate. So I know that DOJ is concerned about price fixing. You're concerned about this issue, and I know you can't speak on the particulars, but can you please talk in the abstract about the importance of price competition in markets and the role of antitrust law in maintaining competitions?
Yes. The theory is that if Suppliers do not collude with each other if they offer the price that East wants. And those customers then meet them in an equal marketplace that will reach an efficient price that will be in the best interest of resource allocation, and particularly with respect to consumer prices.
And do you...
When they collude, when the suppliers collude, they create a monopoly price, which is not good either for the economy in general, but is certainly above the market price. And the kinds of things you're talking about in general, price collusion, which is exacerbated by data collection and logarithms that set suggested prices, that can lead to a price above the competitive price, which costs consumers more.
I thank you so much. I see that I'm almost out of time. Just want to end by saying what many of my colleagues have said before me. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for being willing to answer our questions. And I very much appreciate the expertise that you bring to your job. Thank you so much.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we're here today because of the Republican Party's unrelenting effort to get Donald Trump back into office. No matter the facts, no matter the law, for over a year, the Judiciary Committee, Republican colleagues, have desperately sought evidence for wrongdoing by President Biden. And what have they found? Nothing. Nothing. I'm sure it was disappointing for my Republican colleagues when Special Counsel Hur cleared the president instead of indicting him. But it is time to move on. We should be on the floor moving gun violence legislation, protecting the right to abortion, protecting the LGBTQ Americans across the country who are attacked relentlessly by my colleagues on the other side. This is a colossal waste of time, but more importantly, it is dangerous. What they are doing is dangerous. When this Congress is over, the only achievements my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will be able to point to will be the things that we, as Democrats, help them to pass. 30
Speaker, I
seconds.
yield the gentlelady an additional 30 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized.
It is my job, it is all of our jobs to represent the constituents. I thought that's what we were all here for. I implore my Republican colleagues to stop putting the interests of one man above the interests of Americans. The truth will out, and history will not look kindly on what you have done here. I yield back.
To direct the remarks to the chair.
Again, nobody else?
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from California.
Let's see, we got, the gentlelady from Vermont is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. And I just want to start by saying I'm really sorry that you've had to witness some of this. It's frankly embarrassing at moments. You know, cue the diabolical music. Isn't it true that you believe that climate change is real? Isn't it true that you believe we should reduce our carbon footprint? It's absurd that we're even having this conversation. I represent Vermont. And a year ago, we had catastrophic flooding in Vermont that we're still digging out of. It destroyed basically every small business in the downtown of our capital. From one end of the state to another, we are still dealing with claims to FEMA, still dealing with insurance claims. And I can tell you, it really doesn't matter whether you're talking to a Democrat or Republican. Vermonters know climate change is real, and we are feeling it in all of our downtowns because the water runs downward. And even small rain storms turn into catastrophic flooding for us, and it's happening more and more. So, again, I'm sorry that you have to sit through this. I want to turn to another issue that I think is incredibly important that I don't want to get lost here, which is we talked about pensions. And so I receive a pension in Vermont. Before I was a lawmaker, I was a public school teacher. And I understand really well that many teachers dedicate their entire lives to the future. And I always say, as a middle school teacher, you can't teach middle school unless you believe in the possibility of change and you believe that there is possibility and promise on the horizon. So as teachers, we're focused towards the future. And it's only logical that we would want our investments to be focused on that same thing, stability for the future, so that when we retire, there will actually be a floor, essentially, so that we can live lives of dignity in retirement. And this topic is so important because it goes directly to the heart of it, which is, will hardworking people have the money that they need to retire with dignity? And we're talking about long-term sustainability. As we talked about, earlier, it's teachers, it's janitors, it's all of our frontline workers. And if Congress doesn't allow money managers to make responsible investments now, then we'll see a poorer and darker future for all of those people. And so, it's absurd that we sit here, you are here as responsible investment managers, right? And your job is to make sure that you evaluate risk on behalf of your client. That's why they hire you. That's why they invest their money there. Nobody is forcing them to do this. This is where the market has led us. If a firm wants to attract investment by demanding that it's thinking about demonstrating that it's thinking about the future, the next quarter century, not just the next quarter, we should respect that. We should be supporting that, right? We should get the hell out of the way, honestly, and not drag you before Congress for this ridiculousness here. As has been mentioned before, my Republican colleagues, who are usually so in favor of letting market forces work, would second guess the investment decisions that you're making because they don't align with their worldview. So they've constructed, once again, a dynamic involving a culture war conspiracy theory around investing, responsible investing. We talked about the returns. You're getting great returns. Isn't that what we're supposed to be talking about here? Investing responsibly so people can live with a life of dignity later on. So what are we doing here? We're wasting time, once again, in this committee, not talking about the issues that absolutely impact working people day in and day out. So I just want to go back to basics here. Let's go to each witness here. Let's get at the heart of it. This entire hearing is premised on the idea that responsible investment initiatives somehow require companies to make investment decisions that are in violation of antitrust laws. So, to each of you, do responsible investing initiatives include binding agreements between companies to make certain investment decisions? Yes or no? We'll start with Mr. Bienvenu.
On behalf of CalPERS, we make every decision independently, and it's about generating returns to pay pensions consistent with our fiduciary duty.
Ms. Lamb?
Can you repeat the question?
I want to know, do responsible investing initiatives include binding agreements between companies to make certain investment decisions?
Absolutely not.
Ms. Lober?
Absolutely not.
So again, what are we doing here? I sit in here day in and day out, and I wonder, who's standing up for the little guy? Who's standing up for the little guy? Mr. Chair, before I yield back, I would like to introduce for the record the report of the Democratic staff of the House Judiciary Committee on this investigation, which, unlike the Republican staff report, contains an antitrust legal analysis section reviewing the evidence and concluding that no antitrust violations have been proven here. I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection. The gentleman from California is recognized for unanimous consent.
The gentlelady from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I start my line of questioning, I just have to make a comment about something one of my colleagues said earlier on the other side of the aisle. There was implication made that E. Jean Carroll must have had memory problems. She couldn't possibly have remembered what happened to her. And I just am so incredibly shocked by that statement. I can tell you, when someone has been sexually violated, they don't forget who did it. A jury found him liable, him being the former president, for sexually abusing and defaming E. Jean Carroll. Those are the facts. A jury found that. And I just think it's shocking that somebody on this committee would not only attack juries, we are the Judiciary Committee after all, the onslaught against juries on this committee is shocking to me, but also to use time in committee to further defame E. Jean Carroll. So shifting gears here. Part of the Republicans' attempt to absolve former President Trump for his fraud conviction is the claim that former Justice Department official Matthew Colangelo was somehow dispatched to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office to prosecute Trump. And one of my colleagues touched on this briefly, but I want to circle back around. I've heard my colleagues say in this hearing and others that because Mr. Colangelo took a job with the Manhattan DA after working at DOJ, and in that their eyes this was a pay reduction or career step down, that the only conclusion would be that he changed jobs to get Mr. Trump. People on this committee have asked the Attorney General specifically, how is it that a man, Matthew Colangelo, takes a pay cut and takes a cut in just, what is it he doing for a living as far as prestige to go and join that case? This part of the theory is very revealing to me. It suggests that a person could never change jobs based on anything other than money or prestige. It seems that some of my colleagues have forgotten that public servants may take other things into account when navigating their career. Ambassador Eisen, thank you so much for being here. And the other witnesses, I should have said at the top, thank you for your time. Are you aware of any evidence that Mr. Colangelo was a mole dispatched by General Garland to the Manhattan DA's office?
No, there's none. The Attorney General has definitively debunked this conspiracy theory with his detailed letter that he sent to the committee. For good measure, when I came to work on committee staff with the ranking member and with the chairman in the first impeachment, I took a substantial pay cut. People are motivated by public service. I hope I was on that instance.
I'm not sure how much you worked with me, but you did work with the ranking member.
Mr. Chairman, notwithstanding our differences, I'd like to think that we've maintained a cordial relationship. We see it differently, but we're both trying to do the best for America. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all
Sorry,
right.
Ms.
It's important
Balint.
to have conversations. So you touched on it, but can you think of some other reasonable explanations for a lawyer taking a job that may not appear to be the next step in their career?
Mr. Colangelo has a long record of public service, including in the nonprofit sector. He had previously worked with Mr. Bragg in the AG's office. When you do have a new DA, he acquired a variety of responsibilities when he entered the DA's office. It's an opportunity because the Manhattan DA is such an important role with New York as an American and global financial center. Another reason these 34 false records convictions matter so much. It was an opportunity to have an impact on the public good. I like to think that those kinds of motivations come into play.
And I think one of the challenges for my constituents home watching the work that we do here, watching the news, they all tell me they're exhausted. They don't want to watch anymore. They don't want to watch the news. They don't want to actually know what we're doing here anymore because it feels like every single time they turn on the news, there is another bit of misinformation, another conspiracy theory, another nesting doll, as it were. And it makes it very difficult to find a way to cut through. And so, once again, there is no evidence of collusion involving Mr. Colangelo. Is that right, Mr. Eisen? Is there any evidence?
I hold an empty bottle. There's the same amount of evidence. None.
I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. I yield back.
Gentlelady is back. Gentleman.
CRE over many, many years. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Without objection, Representative Balint from Vermont is waived onto the committee for the purpose of questioning the witnesses at today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Representative Balint from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to bring us back to the reasons that the protections enshrined in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 were needed then and are actually still very much needed today. My community, the LGBTQ community, is constantly under attack in this Congress. According to the Williams Institute, nearly half of LGBTQ plus workers have experienced unfair treatment at work, and LGBTQ employees of color were more likely to report being denied jobs and experiencing verbal harassment. There are endless stories that I could convey in this hearing. I will just cite a few. I'm thinking of one American who faced horrific workplace discrimination. She described how her coworker said that she, quote, was that transgender people were mentally ill and the cure was a bullet between the eyes. Another American, and I stress that, these are Americans who are just trying to live their lives and work in peace. Another American faced workplace violence and discrimination when one of her coworkers became physically aggressive with her while calling her transphobic slurs. Again, while just trying to do her job and live her life. There are so many gut-wrenching stories, and they are an indication of the damage that fearful, hateful, and dehumanizing rhetoric has had on Americans who just want to live their lives. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect in the workplace. And these Title VII protections help us ensure that they are protected. This is about basic humanity. I can't tell you how many times I have to say this in this Congress. It is about basic humanity. People being able to live their lives and work in peace. In the Supreme Court's Bostock decision, our nation's highest court affirmed that Title VII protects against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. But we need explicit protections because so many will still seek to demonize and dehumanize us. And I say us, as I am part of that community. We have to pass the Equality Act to explicitly protect LGBTQ people against discrimination, whether it's in employment, housing, public accommodations, federally funded programs, education, jury selection, credit. I can go on and on and on. People just trying to live their lives as Americans. To the members of my community across this country, I want you to know that you are entitled to dignity and respect at work. You are entitled to dignity and respect everywhere because you are an American and you are entitled to those things. Although there are many people in Congress who push discriminatory bills and hateful amendments and fear-mongering rhetoric every single day that I am in the Capitol, there are also good people in Congress who are standing up to this hateful rhetoric, and I am one of them. I am one of these people who has to, every single day have to come here and do battle with this. I will not allow our voices to be silenced. I will not allow these attacks to go on unchallenged and to have our rights as Americans taken away. We are going to continue to fight alongside all of our strong allies in Congress because we have many. And I want to specifically say to trans people across this country, I see you. I'm here to support you. I want you to live freely and authentically without fear of violence or discrimination. Ms. Wiley, in the minute that I have left, what would it mean for trans people if Republicans' interpretation of Title VII were to prevail and that gender identity was no longer protected by Title VII?
It would mean not only the loss of dignity, not only the loss of jobs, not only the loss of the ability to really be able to ensure that you can take care of yourself and your family fairly and with equal opportunity to work, it would increase danger and physical safety. We saw that in the 11th Circuit case with Tyler Copeland, transgender man, endangered because his own supervisees were harassing and abusing him because he was transgender in front of inmates. That is actually an unsafe condition. And the same in terms of sexual violence, murder. You know, we're essentially giving permission to hate, bias, and violence, and we should not tolerate it, and we stand with you.
Thank you, Ms. Wiley. In closing, I know I'm over, Mr. Chair. I just want to say there are a few, I believe, true believers who spew this hateful indignities towards people in my community, and there are a lot of enablers who go along to get along, and what they're doing is demonizing and dehumanizing their fellow Americans. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time expired. In closing, I want to thank our witnesses for being here.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Yes, yes.
I have
Do not want to be on divisive platforms generally. They tend to unplug from news media generally right now because of the partisanship. They shy away from hate speech. They don't want to be fully engaged day to day on divisive partisan politics. And it follows that people get a negative impression of brands that are associated with that content. This is my understanding from everything that I've heard here today. This is at the heart of what you're talking about in terms of brand safety. So we can't help that there are conservative corners of the web that are rife with hate speech and misogyny and, yes, some disinformation. And it's simply a fact that companies operating in the free market have to contend with that. They have to make decisions about the situation that they're confronted with. And as others have pointed out, I do think there is some hypocrisy at work here when my colleagues claim to care so passionately about the free market, except when it tilts away from decisions that companies are making against posting advertisement on particular platforms that they think are not helping their bottom line. So, Mr. Patel, thank you so much for your time today. Why did Unilever decide to join GARM? Can you just take us through that quickly?
Well, firstly, Unilever created the responsible framework in 2018 because there was a need to have safe content with social media platforms. Then in 2019, GARM was built from 12 advertisers, 6 multimedia sites, social platform sites and agencies. And that was because they needed some sort of structure to say, how would we define brand safety? And that's how the GARM was born. It was voluntary, and it's up to the social media houses to decide on what content is uploaded and not.
I appreciate that. And you said it was based in need. Can you just flesh out for us when you say the need? What was that need?
The need was for advertisers to make sure how would we have a safe place for our brands to be adjacent to content that we thought would be right for our consumers.
And so there are risks to brands. And could you just give us one example of what that looks like when a decision is being made about your product and where it's placed? How does that potentially risk your brand?
Well, an example would be, the Dove brand that's for 20 years has supported real beauty in the US would be next to content that would be harmful to shaming body shapes, which is not what the brand stands for.
And you mentioned that, I believe you said that 75% of your $850 million ad budget is directed towards women in particular.
Yeah.
And so does advertising on parts of the web that feature hate, prejudice, misogyny help you sell your products to women?
No.
Right? No.
No.
No. No. Because I can speak here as a member of this committee. I can also speak here as a woman. No. Right? And so we have lost the thread here on the common sense. And I think we have to cut through all of the posturing here. Why would you want your brand next to speech that potentially is discriminatory towards women if most of your market that you're trying to sell to is women? Mr. Jewell, in your testimony, you describe an apolitical, industry-wide preference to advertise on sports and entertainment sites instead of news. Briefly, can you explain once again why that is?
It's similar to what Mr. Patel just said. We want to avoid divisive conversations and places where you have poor brand association.
I really appreciate that. And in conclusion, I would just like to say this is something that we all should take to heart, that the divisive partisanship and the fear-mongering is not serving the nation. It's also not serving our economy. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
No, I'm sorry. We've been joined by the lady from Vermont. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I come here as a new member of Congress. Was a teacher prior to that. I have 2 teenagers myself. And I know that there is nothing that matters more to us as moms, as our kids. Nothing. And so I want to start there because I know there is absolutely nothing that any of us can say to alleviate the suffering that you have been through and continue to endure with the loss of a child. Prior to coming into the committee today, I was in a hearing on the online dangers that girls and teenagers face. I have committed my life to work on the mental health crisis, the crisis of loneliness in this country, especially among teens and young people. I'm concerned about gun violence prevention. I'm concerned about solving real problems. And what's been so hard for me being on this committee is I come from my state legislature where people do sit down across the aisle. And they sit down and they solve problems together. And it's been very frustrating for me when I know coming into here that this problem, this terrible problem of broken immigration, of dangers at the border, predates this Congress, predates this president. We can go back decades. This is a can that has been kicked over and over again. Now, again, there's no comfort in that for any of you. But I think what Americans need to be demanding of all of us, I don't care what party you are, what they should be demanding of all of us are real answers to these problems. Because nobody should have to bury their child because they've experienced violence. Nobody should. And so I guess I want to make a plea, honestly. We don't know who's going to be president come January. We don't know who's going to be in charge of this chamber, whether it's going to continue to be the Republicans or be the Democrats. We don't know. What we do know is that we, as members of Congress, should be working every single moment of every single day in our committees to actually get work done together. The American people deserve better from all of us. And I think what pains me the most as a parent who just sent my kids off to school again in the last 2 weeks is spending so much time worrying about the gun violence that they experience in schools. And I hear from parents all over my district that they're worried about the safety of their kids. And again, whether it is the violence at the border, whether it is a broken immigration system, whether it's gun violence prevention, I wish that we could stop the grandstanding and actually sit and do work together. That's why we're sent here. We are not sent here to serve any person running for president. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. That is not what we're here for, to talk about your guy or your gal that you want to see in that office. The American people deserve better from all of us. My family deserves better from all of us. And again, there is nothing that I can say to you who have lost your children other than to say, we need to do better. And I make my commitment to you to do my part, to work across the aisle, to stop demonizing each other, to stop demonizing Americans. And I also come to this hearing as the child of an immigrant who came here for a better life. And I never imagined that I would be in the halls of Congress as the child of an immigrant. And so I am holding many stories here as I sit here, and I'm just very deeply, deeply sorry for your loss. And I will do everything that I can in my job to make sure it doesn't happen again. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes Mr. Hunt of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we have family members of victims who were murdered by illegal aliens who should not have been in this country in the first place. I want to start by saying to the victims' mothers, Ms. Ngari,